pleasure to be here with Professor Sokrates Pantelides. We'll have a chat about his life and his achievements and his personal life also. Professor Pantelides, thank you.
Thank you, it's my pleasure to be here.
My first question is just a simple one, probably for you it's not simple, but I need a concise description of your research work for more than
50 years.
For more than 50 years. It's amazing. So tell us about something, make a short description on things you've done and things you are proud of, and how this helps, what kind of possible application they have or they might have in the future.
Okay, I focus on the class of materials, unlike iron and steel and aluminum that you make big structures on buildings and bridges. We focus on the class of materials that we take advantage of the electrons that are inside the materials. This is the quantum properties of materials, and we manipulate the electrons inside. That's what gave us electronics originally back in the 1940s. The first transistor that replaced the vacuum tubes that used to be in televisions and radios and everything else. We have now what we call solid-state devices, in that it's a solid material, not a vacuum tube. And then it's electrons inside the material that we take advantage of. Big class of materials called semiconductors that give us electronics, give us lasers, give us LEDs, all of these things. And I cut my teeth in the early days with silicon, which is the king of semiconductors. And I focus, since semiconductors by themselves, pure materials will be useless, almost useless. It's the injection, the introduction of impurities in very few amounts, in very special places to make structures, we call them nanostructures today. And those structures are the ones that enable you to play with the electrons and make these devices. Play with the electrons by applying voltages primarily, or by exciting them and making them glide as erasers. It's all happening there. And everything is based on the control of impurities and defects that are very useful, simultaneously the elimination of impurities and defects that will hurt you. So my focus has been theoretical in the early days to understand this, and I made some breakthroughs in how we can use quantum mechanics to actually describe the properties of these defects. That's how I broke up on the scene with my PhD thesis, and then a few years later with new methodologies of how to do this thing, and it's been used all over the place. And I was working at the time at IBM's research center, which was a magnificent enterprise with a big company putting money down for basic research, basic in the sense that you follow your nose. And those are the things that ultimately lead to applications. And we made a big difference in the way devices are made, the way electronics is made, with the findings that we got out of science. And sometimes we aim them for that, we know what problem we want to solve, and we do it. Other times, we just follow our nose, say this is interesting. And bingo, we find things that are very useful. So curiosity in science has been very relevant in the past, continues to do so. I left IBM about 25 years ago, and I've had then, since then, been professor at Vanderbilt University. And I moved on way beyond semiconductors to study all kinds of new materials now. Complex oxides is a huge class of materials made of metals, oxidized metals, for instance, iron oxide, for example, but many more complex oxides, and which can be used. They are already used significantly in magnetic transport and magnetic storage. They use sandwiches of these materials. They are the typical ferroelectrics that maintain a polarization. There are a lot of applications in those. In the last 10 years, there has been enormous research in these materials that we can manipulate them by making very thin film structures, these nanostructures, that have exotic and unusual properties, a combination of magnetic, electronic, and optical properties that can make sensors and optical devices or combination of magnetic and, for example, normally you control magnetic process, magnetic storage, for example. We have to use magnetic fields, right? Magnets. But there is the possibility of controlling magnetic behavior by using electric fields, which is simpler and cheaper. Mm-hmm. And there are new ways that we devise by making certain kinds of sandwiches of these materials, we call them technically heterostructures, that you can manipulate magnetism by using electricity.
So this is your second sort?
This is one of many that I do. And another area in the last 10, 15 years has been two-dimensional materials. Graphene is the king of two-dimensional materials. There's now dozens of those. And they're atomically thin, extremely thin, one more layer of atoms. They have very unique properties, and we try again to make structures, and we use the word to functionalize them. Like semiconductors would be almost useless if you didn't play with impurities in there. Two-dimensional materials like graphene has amazing properties, but it needs to be functionalized. You have to do something to it to give you something back. And all two-dimensional materials are like that. And there are just novel ways of playing that. I worked very closely in the last 20 years with microscopists who actually can see individual atoms, especially in two-dimensional materials. You can see pictures of them, really literal pictures of them by electronic means, right? And the kinds of theoretical calculations that we do parallel those pictures, and we can really figure out exactly what's going on and then design structures to predict new behavior that can give us new devices. This is the technologies of the future that we are nurturing. And at some level it's a sandbox, on another level we constantly have our eyes on applications with our friends the engineers.
Such as kind of application?
Applications, again, I work very closely with engineers. I'm in some sense an honorary engineer. I belong also to the engineering school. And we work a lot on electronic devices, like the next generation electronics beyond what is now in your laptop. For a chip that drives your laptop, that thing has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. The density of devices in that. In a chip the size of a thumbnail that is in your laptop, there are a few billion individual devices that are wired with 20-some kilometers of copper wire. The wire is much thinner than the human hair. And it's getting more compact going still to unbelievable levels.
So about 45, 50 years of experience in all these fields.
Yes.
How come you chose science from the beginning? What's the story?
The story is that I grew up with a brother and a sister that were older than me, and I was just dying to learn what they did. And my father was a shoemaker at the time in a village of Cyprus, and the village...
You are from Cyprus?
Yes, I am from Cyprus. Okay. And we had two school teachers in the village. My father's shop there was sort of like a cafe. The school teachers would come there, and they knew me very well. They would constantly inquire about how I was doing. I ended up skipping first grade because I knew how to read and write and everything else. Then I went to high school. I was at the top of my class. And I did beyond my classroom things and got into mathematics. I loved mathematics. I taught myself calculus when I was 13, 14 years old, from books, things like that. And I loved mathematics until by my senior year in high school, I got to the point where I didn't know what to do with mathematics. It was fun, but I said, what do I do with it? I didn't see very much that was mathematical, whether it was...
Applications.
Right. And then in my senior year, we had a quantum mechanics course. I was in the science school. And we used a book that was used at the university in Athens on quantum mechanics. And I saw the fundamental differential equation of quantum mechanics. It was a differential equation, it's a kind of calculus where I knew what differential equations were. I could play with them. I didn't know what to do with them. Not really, they were kind of not very sensible examples in the books. And then I noticed that I saw the differential equation for quantum mechanics, and it was like, mathematics is the language of physics. Because the physics that I was doing before didn't have any serious mathematics in it in high school. It's elementary, right? So in my senior year, I started applying for scholarships for university. I had to go for a year in the army, so I had time. But I applied for scholarships in Greece and to America. I found there was an agency in Cyprus that could handle applications. And I remember filling out the form that I had to choose what I was going to study. And I was studying mathematics, physics, mathematics, physics. And I said, physics. And I didn't really have a clue what physicists do. I mean, you teach physics in high school. Okay, we teach in university. Is that the job that physicists do? I didn't know anything about research and those things. So I said, I'm going to America. And I really went knowing that I'm going to stay there, because Cyprus at the time didn't have a university. And I really wasn't aiming to become a teacher in high school or a professor at a university. I just wanted to figure out what physics is all about and see. So I did, and I had an extremely strong high school. The curriculum was unbelievable. It was a science curriculum. And I did extra curriculum on my own, as I told you, mathematics. I went to an American university, Northern Illinois University, with a scholarship. And I pat myself on the shoulder. I managed to finish in 2 years.
You mean bachelor?
Bachelor in 2 years.
In 2 years?
Yes, because I discovered that you could take proficiency tests on courses that you think you already know the material.
Mm-hmm.
I would go to the bookstore and take the book and look and say, I know this stuff. So I'd go to the department and say, can I take a proficiency test in these things? And sure, they gave me a test and I passed it.
And then you can take another.
And I took the credit for it without taking the class.
Okay.
So then I was told you can take 15 units, like 5 courses. That's a normal role. I did 15 units the first semester, and the second semester I said, what's the maximum? It was 21, so I said, I'll take 21. That's okay.
Yeah.
I got a job. I was working a little bit for extra money. I went to the United States with $100 in my pocket and a suitcase of clothes. That was it. My father really had to work hard to give me those £100. We were very poor. We didn't have any money. And he had to make 2 suits for me because the American embassy there, they had a person, a lady professor, somebody from America. And we went for a few months. It was me and 5 others. We got these scholarships to give us orientation about what we are going to find over here. She must have been from 10 years earlier or something, because she said, you need to take a black suit with you and another one with a different color, because there will be formal dances, formal dinners, and they will invite you to these things and you need to dress. Well, that was 10 years, 15 years earlier probably. I took those suits there. My father had to spend a lot of money to get these suits. I never wore it.
Never wore.
Well, I wore it a couple of times. I didn't have to. But I went there and I found that all the kids were dressed in blue jeans and cut-offs and t-shirts. And then for dinner, these fancy dinners, all you needed was a jacket and maybe you'd be okay. So
At what age you went?
I was 18, I guess, when I went. I spent a year in the army, but because I skipped first grade, 1967, I was 18 when I arrived in the United States. And then I went to the University of Illinois. I got a fellowship there and got my PhD there at age 24, something like that. And I did postdoc, 2 years of postdoctoral at Stanford University, and then I got an offer from IBM, which was at the time like a crown jewel, one of 2 crown jewels in the United States. The other one was Bell Laboratories. It was like, I don't know, it was an enormous.
You worked also for Bell Laboratories?
No, these 2 laboratories were like the crown jewels of research.
So the choice was just by chance. Physics, mathematics. What about not law, sociology, literature? Never crossed your mind?
I was actually very much into philosophy and poetry, and so that's showing my high school. We had a little club, we did that, and I wasn't very much into that, but I never looked at that as a career. Law, medicine,
Why not law? Why not the others?
Law. Actually, law could have been a very attractive possibility because law, I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't like cutting blood and all of that. But doctors and lawyers were the thing of the time because in Cyprus, I finished high school in 1966.
So lawyers and doctors.
Lawyers and doctors would come back and open jobs, right? And they had jobs. But other disciplines like physics, mathematics, the only jobs were high school.
Yeah.
And did I know what other jobs there are for them? Not really. I just didn't seem like there must be something beyond high school jobs. High school. There's nothing wrong with teaching high school. All my friends, many of my friends stayed there and did that. Had a great career. My brother, my sister were elementary school teachers.
Nobody told you why are you choosing physics, theoretical science, when you can do a lawyer, make much more money, much easy money. Nobody mentioned to you from your friends.
Interesting question. See, my parents were not educated. They both had only about 5 years of education. And they believed in me and my brother and sister. They basically supported us to the hilt to follow the direction of our dreams and what we want to do. They had total faith.
They didn't suggest, they didn't.
They did.
Nobody from your friends went to law, to medicine.
I know people in my age and around there that went to medicine. Some of my schoolmates went to medicine, to law, yes. They were mostly from families who had a doctor or a lawyer in the family, probably. I wonder sometimes how even people become engineers, for example. And engineering is not taught in high schools. Law and medicine are not taught in high schools. So it's all by role models, right? Your parents, somebody once said that there are two kinds of doctors, those that wanted to be doctors and those that others wanted to be doctors. I don't know to what extent it's true.
And sometimes our friends say like this.
Yeah.
I
have no pressure on that at all.
Yeah.
And my high school teachers, one or two that I talked with, it was that follow your nose, whatever you think is so like.
40 years or 50 years of work in this field as a researcher and university professor. A lot of experience, 600, 700 papers published. If you look back 50 years to your childhood and you had to choose again your field of study, what you would have chosen?
I would choose the same because especially physics. Mathematics was my thing and I could have become a pure mathematician, but I would have been a little frustrated probably because I have an applied bone in my life. I want to do stuff that are useful, that lead to useful things. And
I was had option law, medicine.
Well, medicine was out of the question. I didn't really, yeah.
We're speaking now, going back.
Yes.
40 years,
yeah,
50 years.
No. Medicine and law, no, I wouldn't have chosen. There's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly fine professions. Law is a possibility. I could have thought about it because as a kid, in high school, I liked to give speeches during national holidays. I would just go out and scream about our national ideals and our struggles for independence and all of those things. I could have become a politician, but I don't have the people handling ability. I don't understand fools very well.
I'm asking this question because, today, the science engineer are not respected so much and are not paid so much compared to lawyers, medical doctors, to politicians, etc., etc. We are the least paid, the least respected. How do you feel about that? Why? You know why? Your personal opinion.
Well, I'll tell you, in Europe, professors and scientists are respected a lot more than in America. Respect is a funny word. It's a status in society. And that was one of the things that surprised me when I came to America. Even elementary school teachers and high school teachers, when I grew up, were the most respected members of society. They were all going around with a jacket and tie. They were then professors at universities, worked at universities. I came to America and I had a summer job working in the bookstore. We were collecting books that the students returned and were taking them to the back to sort them, to send them to other places. And I discovered one of the people working there, he looked like the rest of us. He was a high school teacher near in the village next over there. And I said, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. What is your tie and what is your demeanor and all that? So, but then I realized this is a simple society. People don't wear their job on their sleeve. And I like that. And there's sort of, this anonymity is good. I walk into a department store or a hardware store and I go in my blue jeans and I don't have to look over my shoulder and say, oh, I got to maintain my standing. I'm a professor. I've got to button up.
That's okay.
All of that. It's okay. I love it.
I was making comparison with other professions that I ignore and why it happens. Why the number of students in engineering and sciences going down in all developed countries besides China? Only China is a difference.
It's a very good question about did money ever fare into my thinking about what I'm going to do. I hate to admit it, but probably not. In that I have this faith at best that if you get a good education and you're really at the frontiers of the field, you'll do okay. Okay by some definition, I'm not going to be a billionaire, but look at how people in the modern era have become billionaires by doing whatever they are into, then they were creative. I have been very creative in my business, but it doesn't give you the kind of thing that you get if you create Facebook, right? Those are unique opportunities and they're singular, they're totally singular. But we do okay, we are paid reasonably well. If you do well in this profession, you get paid.
Any regrets for these 50 years?
Not really. In a career you change directions sometimes, you run into difficulties sometimes. One thing I learned is that if you, both in research and in other things you try to do, if you run into a stone wall, don't keep hitting your head on the wall. Right? You try something else. Yeah. So you learn to navigate and life is good.
So what was the best day, if you can find one in your life, professionally or non-professionally? What's the best?
Well, one of the
most happy one.
One of the happiest is when I married my wife for 47 years.
It's a Greek one?
No.
No? Oh, okay.
I didn't really have a chance to meet Greeks. In my first school, I don't believe there were any students from Greece or Cyprus.
Oh, okay.
There were a few Greek-American girls and I got to meet them, but from day one, I said, I'm in America, I'm unlikely to go back, and I told that to my parents. And I don't intend to be a foreigner in the country I'm going to live. What does that mean? I'm going to live here, and if I start looking for Greeks to do company with, that's not good. I should look for people to make friends with for what they are, not because they're Greek. It turns out I have some excellent Greek friends. I ran into them, became friends, perhaps in part because they were Greek, but they were also great people. And I lived my life like that. And it was something I said, you forgot your origins. No, I did not. I value my origins, and I didn't try to ram Greekness into my daughters by forcing them to go to school to learn Greek.
What about children?
And I have two daughters.
What is the profession?
One of them is a professor of English, applied English in my language, I would say.
Okay.
They are the people that teach people how to write as opposed to writing or critiquing literature. And she loves it, and she's a great researcher, and has two beautiful children.
And the second daughter?
The second one is a designer. She followed her nose in arts. I didn't try to push her anywhere.
Not in science.
I told them to get a great education.
Yeah.
I let them pick their school. The only suggestion I made for a school, that has to be a good school, and I said, pick one that you won't have to make a stop by aeroplane to come home for Christmas, because if it's snowing, you may get stuck up there. Think about that. Otherwise, pick a good school and I'll be behind you. And that's what my parents did, and they had faith in me, and I had faith in my daughters.
What was the best day in professional life?
Best day in professional lives? Well, there are a few exciting times. One question that I often ask young people that I interviewed for postdoctoral jobs or for jobs as professors or in my IPM days, people to hire. I served as manager there as well, and I to hire people. One question is that in your physics research that you did so far, can you think of a singular event that you discovered something that nobody else knew and you would go out and scream about it? Yeah. Most people have a hard time answering that. They say, well, I'll tell you three. I say, no, I won't.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Yes, I have moments of discovery, many in my
career.
So those are moments of discovery, right?
3, 4, 5 big ones.
Oh, I have big ones that got my career going when I realized how to solve how to describe the properties of point difference in semiconductors. That was viewed as one of the major unsolved problems in solid-state physics. And I said, bingo, I got it. Now, if there was a way you were even go outside in the street and scream, I would have done.
What about the most difficult moment, if you like to respond, in life or in professional life or normal life?
Well, it wasn't really difficult. I left IBM and looked for a position outside in universities, and I ended up at Vanderbilt University. It turned out to be a great place to be.
What was that difficult?
No, interviews are not a pleasant exercise, even if you are invited and right. Everybody's asking you questions, poking at you, and so on. So it was a transition. No matter who wants to hire you, you have to go through an interview process, and I interviewed at a few places.
How you overpass this? What's the advice for people? How normal the scientist is supposed to overpass difficulties, bad moments?
You deal with it. I just remember the difficulty that I overcame, not scientific. When I came with a scholarship to the United States, we were told that we get a scholarship to finish undergraduate degrees. When I got the offer from America, it said, this is for 1 year and not renewable.
Not renewable, okay.
So I tell the guy that was running the office that he was a Cypriot employed by the US government in some office, I don't remember what it was called. I showed him the letter. I said, this is ridiculous. What am I going to do after the first year? He says, don't worry, they always say that. I've seen it before, he says, and rest assured, just go and you won't have any problems. I didn't like it, but I went. And then a few months after, a month or so after, I went to the foreign student's office, and it was a very nice gentleman running. And I asked him the question, what's going to happen? He was puzzled. Yes, I see the letter, it says for only 1 year, it must be only for 1 year. And I said, what am I supposed to do for the second year? He says, I have no idea why it's this way. I'll have to find out, but that's the way it's set up, it looks like. And he made a few phone calls, and I remember a distinct call, and I was sitting there, and he called somebody in my presence, and he said, I have a young man here from Cyprus. And the guy on the other side, on the other line says, Cyprus, Illinois? Anyway, it was, I wrote a letter to the man in Cyprus. I said, what are you going to do about this? I'm going to throw me out at the next year. Now, by the end of my first year, it turned out I finished 2 years where I had 60 units out of 120. But I only had those $100, that's all I had. And I didn't spend them. It was a full scholarship. I had a dormitory, a dining, everything. I only needed pocket money, and I got a small job. It was okay.
What are your hobbies besides science?
Well, let me tell you how I solved the problem.
Oh, yes, sorry.
I got very lucky. There was an option to apply. There were little scholarships that I started applying for and that sort of thing, but it was, there was no tuition, a very small tuition, but it was the dormitory, and I don't remember what the total was. I applied to be a resident advisor in the dormitories. I wasn't really qualified. It was my first year in the United States. I didn't know enough about the American culture. Well, I came first runner-up. I didn't get the job, but I was the first runner-up for the whole class of people that were admitted. And lucky, somebody dropped out, and I was the next in line. I have no idea what would have happened if I hadn't gotten that, because that took care of the dormitory and the rest of the expenses were covered by, I had a job, I was able to go to apply.
So that's good luck.
This was unbelievable, how it happened. I never figured out why that stupid idea of bringing somebody for a year and then telling them no more. Then, to the next question.
No, just hobbies. What kind of hobbies
Oh,
do you like besides science?
I've gone through amazing kinds of hobbies. I got into woodworking. I set up a complete shop in my house. I was doing woodworking. I got into landscaping and I learned how to build stone walls. I learned, even though when we bought our first house, I was worried that I didn't know anything about how anything works in the house. Right? I never saw the house like that. Wood frame and the plumbing and, well, 10 years later. So I bought the first house and that's how we figured it out. And through the help of friends who knew how to do everything, in 10 years I could have probably built a house with my 200. I learned how to do everything. I enjoyed it and learned how to do it.
Wow.
I built a chimney in the 70s and installed the wood stove. I built the whole chimney and I spent all the time designing it. It was the most efficient chimney.
So it's mostly working yourself and building yourself.
I did a lot of those things. Gardening.
Besides this, any sports, any sports?
Sports, I was never into sports for some reason or another, except for when I was a child, in elementary school and all that, we go with my friends and play soccer. Everybody played soccer at the time. There was not much else to do. Free time, we just kick them all around. But in my high school and beyond, I was never much into sports until about, well, I still don't do sports, but I got into exercises about 20 years ago. I do routine everyday exercise. I go to the gym every day.
Every day? 6 o'clock in the morning. That's very good. That's very good.
Other hobbies? I got into photography when I was in high school. I saved my own money and bought a camera, and I was around doing interesting photographs. And then in college, again, I did some photography, and then I got tired of carrying lenses and cameras around. Of course, now we don't need to carry anything around, but I don't do it anymore. I built, do you know what a Heath kit is? Have you heard of a Heath kit? You're too young to know. In the old days, you bought a Heath kit. It was a kit. You could buy all the components and put it together and make a stereo set. You could build a television.
Really?
They went out of business when chips came out and everything was just a chip. And I built as a postdoc in 1973.
You built it yourself?
With my wife, and we built it together. We've done, I told you, that was one of the happiest days in my life.
Your wife is American?
My wife is American. She has an analog mind and I have a digital mind.
She has what kind of mind?
An analog.
Analog.
She's an artist.
Oh, that's how you divide them? An artist is an analog mind. And you have digital.
Right. I break everything in numbers. And I digitize everything.
Wow, that's great. It makes me think.
And we did a lot of things together. Even the Heath kit, we would solder things together and do that. But she was teaching dance for a long time. She had a degree was in dance.
Okay.
And then we had our first child and stayed home for a while. And then she got into horses. That was her dream of her life, to get into horses. And then for the next 35 years, we had a farm with horses.
So a fulfilled life, if a student hears you, would you tell him, Follow my example in physics.
Follow my example in
Would
physics.
would you tell to a student that probably will be?
It's a different word. If you were to ask me now, what advice would I give to somebody? Depends on their interest. If they're really into mathematics, as I was, physics still remains the number one applied mathematics. Mathematics is really the language of physics, and by extension of engineering, but it's not as sophisticated mathematics.
So, what are you going to tell me?
But there's also the field of economics today that there's a lot of mathematics. Physics is still very attractive discipline. If you put the money component in, computer science, biomedical engineering, those could be a lot more profitable. And there are also great intellectual challenges in those fields. Okay. In my days, the only field that really had a quantitative intellectual challenge, if you see, well, mathematics could be a key player, physics was the one. I don't know where engineering was at the time.
But you're happy, you're fulfilled with physics.
Engineering in those days, yes.
No, I'm saying that you're happy and you're fulfilled, alive, fulfilled.
Yes,
fulfilled,
my life
you're
was very fulfilled.
So with physics, yes. So that was the matter. And then your example speaks by itself. Probably let them choose as you say.
Yes.
Then
Let me make one last comment about engineering, because I'm an honorary engineer now. I belong to engineering as well. At the time when I got into physics, electrical engineering was all about power lines, and chemical engineering was about chemical plants, and mechanical engineering was bridges. This is too simplistic a view, but now engineering is essentially a lot of it is materials engineering and nanostructures everywhere involved. With the possible exception of civil engineering, but even they do not know nanostructures. So engineering has changed dramatically, and the intellectual challenges there are even bigger in some sense, because it's not just to figure out the physics, you have to also make something work. I've always had the most tremendous admiration for engineers. I say sometimes, if we had to depend on physicists, we would still be living in cages probably. Because engineers built the Parthenons and the Colosseums without knowing Newton's laws. Right.
That's a very interesting point, and that close this. This is one of the highest points in this interview.
It's been my pleasure.
So no, it's a pleasure is mine. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.